Ladies and gentlemen, Pan-Africanists, in just 1 month, Captain Ibrahim Traoré has proven once again why he is the leader Burkina Faso needs in these transformative times. With vision, determination, and an unwavering commitment to progress, he has delivered 3 monumental achievements that will reshape the nation's future. This is not just leadership. This is revolutionary change in action.
What if the world's next industrial revolution isn't being written in New York, Beijing, or Berlin, but in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso? A landlocked West African country once dismissed as one of the poorest on earth is now daring to flip the script, positioning itself at the center of Africa's new industrial age. For decades, Africa's story has been told in the language of extraction: gold, cocoa, oil, bauxite, raw resources dug up and shipped away, leaving behind empty holes in the ground and economies that remained vulnerable to global price swings. Burkina Faso knows this story all too well. The country's gold mines made billions for foreign companies but left its people scraping by. Its cotton fed international fashion houses while farmers struggled to afford fertilizer. It was a cycle that seemed unbreakable. But something has shifted. Under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré and a new wave of African-minded economic planners, Burkina Faso has declared, no more exporting raw resources only to buy them back as expensive finished goods. No more dependency on foreign-controlled institutions to define development. No more remaining at the mercy of outsiders while millions of its young citizens search for opportunity. This is the spark that has ignited Africa's new industrial age, and Burkina Faso is positioning itself as the unlikely starting point. Walk into a factory in Ouagadougou today, and you may be surprised. Where there once were only warehouses for imported goods, you now see assembly lines producing electric motorcycles built for African roads, cashew nut processing plants that ship directly to European and Asian markets, and workshops experimenting with locally designed agricultural machinery. Burkina Faso is doing something radical, keeping value at home. Instead of shipping cashew apples raw to India, they're turning them into juice, oil, and packaged snacks within their own borders. Instead of sending raw gold to Switzerland for refining, the country has begun building its own refinery facilities. The economic logic is simple but powerful. Every step of the value chain kept in Burkina Faso creates jobs, skills, and revenue. A cashew processor employs 500 people. A refinery employs hundreds of engineers and technicians. A motorcycle assembly line builds not just machines, but an ecosystem. Mechanics, spare parts dealers, exporters, and innovators who adapt designs to local needs. For the first time in its history, Burkina Faso is writing its own terms of trade. Skeptics might ask, why here? Why now? How can a landlocked country with no seaport and a history of instability claim to spearhead Africa's new industrial wave? The answer lies in 3 converging realities: geopolitical shifts. With global supply chains fractured by wars, tariffs, and rivalries between great powers, countries are searching for alternatives. African states like Burkina Faso are seizing the moment to fill niches once ignored. Pan-African movements. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, is slowly tearing down borders within Africa. A motorcycle built in Burkina Faso can now find a market in Ghana, Nigeria, or Côte d'Ivoire without crippling tariffs. Rejection of dependency. The break from ECOWAS, the growing distance from France, and the refusal to bow to IMF dictates have given Burkina Faso freedom to test bold economic experiments. Instead of chasing loans tied with conditions, it is negotiating secret trade deals with new partners: Russia, Turkey, China, and fellow African allies. This cocktail of circumstances has made Burkina Faso a laboratory for what an industrial Africa could look like when it's unshackled from external control. Factories are more than machines, they are symbols. In Burkina Faso, every new assembly plant represents more than the goods it produces. It is a declaration of sovereignty. When a young Burkinabe engineer walks into a local textile mill and sees clothes stitched with "Made in Burkina Faso" labels, it transforms not just her career, but her imagination of what's possible. Stories already circulate across Ouagadougou of young men and women leaving informal street vending to work in these new plants. One former street hawker, Amadou, now earns a salary at an agro-processing center.
Before, I sold water sachets for coins. Now I am part of something bigger. We are feeding not just our families, but our country.
It's these individual transformations that, multiplied across thousands of households, create the foundation for national prosperity. Of course, such moves don't come without resistance. Traditional power brokers, both within Africa and outside, are not pleased. Shutting the door on foreign refineries, sidelining Western multinationals, and bypassing ECOWAS regulations means Burkina Faso is stepping on toes. Already there are whispers of sanctions, trade blockades, and attempts to destabilize these efforts. But history shows that every industrial age, from Britain's mills to China's special economic zones, has begun in defiance of established powers. Burkina Faso is simply the latest challenger to the status quo. The gamble is enormous. Factories require capital, technology, and expertise. Choosing to go it alone without IMF safety nets means the country risks financial strain. But for many Burkinabe, the cost of remaining dependent is far higher. This shift is more than economic, it's cultural. Burkina Faso is crafting a new identity, not a passive exporter of raw goods, but a proud manufacturer and innovator. This is a message to its youth that their future lies not in dangerous migration routes across the Sahara or the Mediterranean, but in building something lasting at home. In many ways, Burkina Faso's factories are like lighthouses in the desert. They are small beacons now, but they signal the dawn of something far bigger. Africa claiming ownership of its own development path. And so, as machines roar to life in Ouagadougou and Bobo Dioulasso, one question remains. Can Burkina Faso sustain this momentum, or will it be crushed by the weight of global politics and entrenched interests? That's where we go next, examining the hidden deals, alliances, and risks shaping this industrial revolution. What do you think? Is Burkina Faso truly entering Africa's new industrial age? Or is it a bold gamble destined to collapse under pressure? Drop your thoughts in the comments, subscribe, like, and share this video so more people can join the conversation. When Burkina Faso, along with Mali and Niger, pulled out of ECOWAS earlier in 2025, critics called it reckless. How could landlocked nations sever themselves from one of Africa's largest regional blocs, knowing it might limit their access to markets and finance? But to Burkinabe leaders, the decision was not reckless. It was liberation. For years, ECOWAS rules had kept countries like Burkina Faso tethered to economic structures that favored larger coastal states and foreign partners. Regional tariffs, trade protocols, and monetary restrictions often forced landlocked countries to play by rules they did not write. For instance, Burkina Faso's cotton exports faced layers of bureaucracy that slowed trade while foreign companies enjoyed easy access. By walking away, Ouagadougou signaled that it would no longer submit to regional policies designed to protect external interests. Instead, it has turned toward creating the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, with Mali and Niger, a bloc driven by shared security concerns and now, increasingly, economic cooperation. This new alliance is reimagining what regional integration could mean when it is not filtered through Paris, Brussels, or Washington. It is not about keeping the CFA franc stable for French investors. It's about channeling resources into factories, agriculture, and infrastructure for Africans first. Burkina Faso's industrial surge is not happening in isolation. The government has been quietly negotiating deals that bypass Western-dominated institutions. Some of these agreements are whispered about in regional press, others are hidden altogether. One example, recent reports suggest Burkina Faso has signed long-term barter agreements with Russia, trading gold and uranium for machinery, fertilizer, and technical expertise. These kinds of deals cut out the dollar entirely, avoiding the traps of IMF repayment schedules and sanctions. Similarly, there are talks of joint ventures with Turkey to establish textile plants that serve African and Middle Eastern markets. China, too, is watching closely, seeing opportunities to secure supply chains at a time when U.S. tariffs are shaking global trade patterns. But perhaps the most intriguing element is Burkina Faso's outreach to fellow African nations. Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, and even non-neighboring states like Uganda have been quietly exploring agreements to exchange finished goods instead of raw resources. Imagine this. Burkinabe assembled electric motorcycles shipped to Ghana, while Ghana sends processed cocoa butter in return.
Ibrahim Traoré, the 5th president of Burkina Faso, and Africa's youngest president whose name echoes across the continent like a thunder. His actions and trajectory of leadership in Burkina Faso makes the old African leaders look like real jokers, if not hungry hyenas, who have been milking their people and countries. Having risen to power in September 2022, after removing Paul-Henri Damiba in a coup d'etat. The young military leader has demonstrated charisma in handling the affairs of Burkina Faso while putting his country first, making numerous development and shaping the country's political landscape for a better future.
What happens when a nation once written off as too poor, too fragile, and too landlocked dares to industrialize on its own terms? That is the question Burkina Faso is forcing the world to answer. This is not just an economic experiment, it is a revolution in how Africa sees itself and how the world will soon be forced to see Africa. Already the shockwaves are spreading. In Washington and Brussels, policymakers are debating how to respond to the Sahel's new defiance. In Paris, Burkina Faso's pivot away from French control has reignited fears of losing long-standing influence across West Africa. And in Beijing, the story is viewed differently, not as a threat, but as an opportunity. China knows what it means to be dismissed by the West, only to rise as a manufacturing superpower. For Beijing, a Burkina Faso with factories, refineries, and processing plants represents a potential ally in reshaping global trade patterns. This is why Chinese delegations have quietly visited Ouagadougou, exploring ways to integrate Burkinabe industries into broader supply chains. But make no mistake, the West sees this as a threat. A self-sufficient Africa, trading with itself and with non-Western powers, undermines centuries of economic structures that kept the continent dependent. Yet the road ahead is steep. Industrial revolutions demand stability, and Burkina Faso is still battling insurgency in its northern regions. How do you protect factories when armed groups threaten highways and villages?
Over the past 2 weeks, increasing jihadist aggressions in southeastern Burkina Faso have pushed hundreds of Burkinabes across the border into Ghana. These displaced Burkinabes are said to have come from communities in the Zouaga department, where armed men linked to the Jenim terrorist group have since the beginning of this year allegedly launched coordinated attacks targeting the security and defense forces, including the civilian auxiliary forces known as VDPs or Kugluwegu. The terrorists were said to have attacked the border communities of Zerboko, Yoga, Zebere, and Zoga, where they looted and in some cases set ablaze a police station and also ordered the people to end any cooperation or collaboration with the state security forces or face collective punishment the next time they return.
For decades, African youth have been told their best chance at prosperity was to migrate, to escape, to seek opportunity elsewhere. Burkina Faso is trying to change that narrative. When a young woman in Ouagadougou chooses to study engineering instead of applying for a visa to Europe, that is revolution. When a farmer's son decides to work in a local refinery instead of risking his life across the Sahara, that is revolution. These small decisions, multiplied across a generation, will decide whether Burkina Faso's factories become the foundation of a new Africa, or just another footnote in failed development experiments. Think about what it means to stamp "Made in Burkina Faso" on a product. To outsiders, it may just be a label, but for Burkinabe citizens, it is a declaration. We are no longer just a source of raw material. We are producers, we are creators, we are equals in the global marketplace. This is why the stakes are so high. Burkina Faso's experiment is not just about economics, it is about dignity. It is about reclaiming the narrative of a continent long dismissed as incapable of industrial strength. It is about proving that Africa can chart its own destiny without waiting for handouts, loans, or permission. If Burkina Faso succeeds, even modestly, the implications will be seismic. Neighboring countries will follow suit. Mali could build lithium battery plants instead of shipping ore to Asia. Niger could refine uranium for African energy grids instead of European reactors. Ghana could turn its cocoa into global chocolate brands instead of supplying Swiss companies. Piece by piece, Africa would no longer be the raw materials pit of the world. It would be a continent of producers, and that would shift global power balances in ways we have not seen since the rise of Asia. But if it fails, if insurgency, sanctions, or corruption derail this industrial drive, the consequences could be equally dramatic. It would strengthen those who argue Africa is doomed to dependency, and discourage other nations from daring to follow the same path. This is the tightrope Burkina Faso walks, between hope and failure, between sovereignty and sabotage. Every industrial revolution begins with a spark. Britain's came from coal, America's from steel, China's from export factories. For Burkina Faso, the spark is not just resources, it is defiance. the refusal to remain trapped in a cycle of extraction and dependency, the willingness to risk isolation in order to secure dignity. When historians look back at this moment, they may see it as the dawn of something extraordinary, the moment Africa stopped exporting its future and began building it at home. And whether Burkina Faso succeeds or fails, it has already altered the conversation. No longer is Africa waiting for permission. No longer is Africa content to play the role assigned to it. The machines in Ouagadougou's new factories are not just producing goods, they are producing possibility. And so we return to the question, is this truly the beginning of Africa's new industrial age, or is it a fragile dream facing impossible odds? That answer will not be given in conference rooms in Europe or boardrooms in America. It will be written in the deserts and cities of Burkina Faso, by the hands of its people, and by the choices of Africa's next generation. What do you think? Is Burkina Faso lighting the path for Africa's future, or is it a bold gamble waiting to be crushed by global forces? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video, because the conversation about Africa's future is only just beginning.